Thank you guys for hosting me. It's great to come out here again. It's been about 15 years since I was last here. So I'm excited to be able to show some of the stuff that I work on, but mostly the stuff that my colleagues work on. The title of the talk today was Cyber Cowboys Wrangling Big Data on the Open Science Frontier. We're Texas, so brought my boots, got my big belt. But for those of you that don't know William Gibson, Neuromancer was his book from 30 years ago about cyber cowboys working in virtual reality and surfing. So it's kind of where we're going.
Yeah, you can probably close that.
Okay, so overview of the talk. I'm talking about the big data landscape first. This year is 2023, the year of open science. We'll get into what it means to become a cloud native scientist. A little bit of discussion about how artificial intelligence is impacting us in the workplace. And then I'll finish the last half of the talk showing some specific use cases for how CyVerse is being used in science. So this slide is intentionally hard to read. So this is called the big data landscape. And it's a large image put out by a venture capitalist named Matt Turk. He hasn't put one out in a couple of years now, maybe because he got tired of organizing all of these different software products. But he started doing this about 10 years ago, and the landscape used to be a lot smaller. And at this point, it's gotten to be so big that we can't even see the icons for each of these individual software. But just to focus in on a couple areas where I think most of us live, some of these logos might stand out to you, like some of you might use MATLAB for MathWorks in your work. Some of you probably use R for statistics, or you work in the Python ecosystem. Maybe you use RStudio. And so, just in a few of these icons, you can imagine that you've spent most of your career learning an individual programming language and getting really good at it. And when you back out to the scale of the landscape, it's huge. There's more software, there's more people developing things than would take 100 lifetimes to learn. And that's okay. So just some more kind of factoid numbers. At this point, we've got over 100,000 data scientists in this country. This is a position that probably didn't have a job title 10 or 15 years ago. Around the world, there's about 27 million software engineers. So there's people going to work every day and writing. This was kind of shocking to me. There's now about 15 billion devices on the internet. So it seems like a lot, but that's really just like 2 per person. And I know when I go home and look at my personal network, there's about 30 different devices on it. And 7.9 zettabytes of data, which again is only about 8 billion terabytes. So again, about a terabyte of data per person on the planet. So it seems like a lot, but it's getting bigger every year. And just to realize that it's big space, there's room for everybody to live in it, and it's getting bigger every year. Last August, there was a memo put out by the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and it revolves around access to federally funded research data. And its intention is for researchers to publish their data without delay. So there's no more embargo on data that you generate from your federally funded project. So this is called the Nelson Memo. And it's available from the White House website. The talk is online. I put the URL up on the board here, and maybe we can put it in the chat in Zoom. So people are welcome to go and hang on to these slides and look through them. So number one, we have to update our policies no later than December 21st, 25, that all the publications and their supporting data are publicly accessible. The procedures are transparent, ensuring scientific integrity, and that we can coordinate this through equitable delivery through research results. So this is kind of a pretty strong mandate for those of us that have been doing science for a while. We know it's not so easy to get our data out. So I can only see a few of you in the room. We can't see everybody online, but maybe a show of hands of the folks online. How many of you feel that you have been trained to analyze your data and then make it accessible immediately after you analyze it? Got a good group of people that can put their data out. And this includes things like documenting your data, curating it for long-term reuse, and then the share code. So this is something that I think would scare a lot of researchers to know that they have to publish their data. And so what I would argue is that we have a capacity versus capability problem. We have lots of compute out there. The cloud is there. It's huge. We have the capacity to store our data. There's lots of data already. There's so much data out there to analyze that we don't really need more of it necessarily. And there's lots of really good software to work with this data. What we're lacking is a digitally literate set of domain scientists that can actualize all that capacity. So scientists that know how to code, scientists that know how to apply advanced data science techniques to their data sets. So we're lacking in that domain. We need to start to train this new generation of fast forward again from the White House Office of Science, Technology Policy. In January, they put out this next call about advancing open and equitable research. And so this was centered on this PR campaign, which they're calling the Year of Open Science. And this is being led by the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, and then NASA has a project called TOPS, so this Transformed Open Science. It's a $40 million 5-year endeavor to help us build up our open science curricula and to set a framework about for doing open science. How many of you have heard of this Year of Open Science? 1, 2. Yeah, so we're welcome to the Year of Open Science. And that kind of leads to this question of like, what is open science? For some of us, it might mean publishing in an open access journal. That's probably the first thing most people think of. Is like, I'm gonna pay the extra $3,000 or $5,000 or what, I don't know how much it costs to publish in Nature now, it's $15,000 to have an open access paper published. But to put your science out there in a way that people can access it without having to have a paywall. For others, it might be using open source software. So the open source software initiative is all about setting open licenses on software and then making it usable for people. For those of you that work in computer science, you're probably familiar with Git and the concept of version control for software. So version controlling your software, making it available. There's this concept called the FAIR data principles, which means findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So basically committing yourself to creating data sets that can be reused by others. And for those of you that do data science stuff, it might be writing scripts in R or in Python and putting this up on Proximate. CyVerse started teaching this workshop series about 5 years ago. And we did it sort of as a play on words. So we call it FOSS, which is normally free and open source software. We call this foundational open science skills. This photo was from our last FOSS class in March of 2020. So our students were getting on the airplane and going home to quarantine. But we started teaching this, and we didn't necessarily have a really set path, but over the last 5 years, we've come up with a set of modules that include, there's a lesson 0, which is just teaching people how to work on the command line, how to use bash scripting and version control Git. But the first lesson is this one that we're kind of looking at here. And so it's centered on teaching people about open access, open data, methods, peer review, et cetera. And each of these, could be an entire hour-long lecture. But we're doing this in a virtual format now, a couple hours a week for about 8 weeks. We bring people in. And the material, we can't see it in the room because the Zoom banner is blocking it, but it's on a free URL. All the material are public. We do record the lessons and we put it up on an unlisted YouTube channel for the students so they can read that. If you guys want to sign up for this, we do have a subscription service now for CyVerse. We'll talk about that later, but it comes with free classes, so you can sign up for this. And if you really want to get into it, just reach out to me and I'll get you into the class this fall. So we teach it about twice a year. So this has been sort of our kind of internal journey of like, what is open science? How do we teach open science? And we're teaching this to advanced graduate students, postdocs, and we've even had early career faculty come in and new NSF PIs take this class to kind of help get themselves set for having an open science lab and then even working on things like writing data management plans for new proposals. Okay, so want to be a little interactive. How many of you collect your science on pen and paper or do computations on a whiteboard still? Some of you. Yeah, there's pen and paper in the back, I see. Okay. How many of you do most of your work on a laptop? You can see like 7 or 8 laptops in here. Okay, how many of you have a workstation or like a high-end kind of computer? Just a couple. How many of you collect data on your phones? A couple. The farmers, I figured I could get. I gave this the same slide I used it in a presentation for a forest fire ecology workshop to fire managers, and nobody was raising hands, and I got to phones and like they all raised their hands. So if you're a first responder or you're working out in a remote site, you're connecting to the internet using your phone. And then this last one, how many of you guys actively use like Google Drive or Teams? So like you're already like technically cloud native, like you're doing work up in the cloud if you're using these platforms. Okay, so next interactive question, how many of you have a Windows laptop or Windows operating system? Yep, most of you. Max, just a couple. How many of you use a Linux OS for your job? 1. Yeah, almost 2. That's about right. So globally, 76% of the world uses Windows for their computing. All the elitist Apple people, there's only like 16% of you, and there's only 5% of probably these are the software engineers that are using Linux. So if I switch the question up and I ask what operating system is used most frequently for cloud computing and supercomputing, what operating systems do you think they are? Linux. Right. So at this point, again, we can't quite see it, but
If you hit the chat, if you do that and then close it, it should go away. Yeah, and now close the meeting chat. There you go. You can close that window up there too if you want to.
Okay, so yeah, at this point, as of like 2020, 100% of high performance computing centers are on Linux. This isn't quite the case in cloud. There are some Windows servers still running in Microsoft Azure, but by and far, even Microsoft is running Linux on most of their cloud. So this is kind of a weird disparity. A lot of people still use Windows, but then when you go to use the cloud, you're using Linux. So that's like the next thing is like, okay, well, let's use the cloud, right? And for most people, it's like, well, what is that, right? What does it mean to actually use the cloud? And the history of this was that typically when people talked about working on remote services, they would draw this diagram where you have a server or you have a PC or a laptop and it's connected over this cloud, which is the internet. So you can just conceivably think of cloud as being devices that are connected. And for those of you that use the cloud or are interested in starting with cloud, there's free cloud. There's access to platforms like Google's Colab, the little icon on the bottom left. The MyBinder project is another one where you can launch free virtual machines, just drag and drop a GitHub repository and we'll start a VM. And these are great. You can go and start remote services and run analyses on the cloud. But those platforms are typically very limited. So you get 1 or 2 cores, 1 or 2 gigs of RAM, only a few gigs of data, and they'll time out on an hour or 2. If you leave them alone for 15 minutes, they'll lock themselves. So this slope is really slippery because you start to need larger resources. Platforms like DigitalOcean or AWS are out there that you can go and get paid services from. I've actually been using this GitHub code spaces quite a lot, but CyVerse is another one of these resources, and I'll talk a lot about CyVerse in a while, but there are larger resources available on the cloud for doing scientific research or, importantly, doing training and education. And for the most part, you can get these things for free or at reduced costs. So thinking about myself, like what do I use day to day? I have my laptop that I brought with me. So I use this for answering emails and talking to my team on Slack. But I actually use it mostly just to remotely connect to other larger pieces of hardware. So I have in my office a little Nook, just a little 4x4 thing that powers a couple monitors and a keyboard and a mouse. Similarly, it's just connected to the internet, and I'm running a Linux operating system on that. And I do run Mac on my laptop. This is nice for me because I don't have to worry about weird file paths that I get with Windows. But as I'll talk about in a little bit, it doesn't really matter what your operating system is you're working from. And so those are my two kind of connection points to get onto larger resources. So I own and operate a couple of large servers that are part of CyVerse that I have access to and my friends have access to. And then I have other shared services like the High Performance Computing Center or the general pool of CyVerse resources that we can run on. And these are all running using Linux. But when it comes to my software, I find myself mostly using this. This logo on the left is for Visual Studio Code. I start up a VS Code instance and then I'm connecting it to a GitHub repository. And just to point out that VS Code, GitHub, and OpenAI, and this little robot guy, Copilot, are all Microsoft products. So even though I'm not using Windows for my operating system, I am completely reliant on Microsoft technology. And these platforms are designed to run in Windows seamlessly. So at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter what I'm using for my OS. And ostensibly I'm doing this so I can do my data science, so I can run my Python script or do analyses in R, and I'm using a terminal to do this. And I would have thought that that was the end of the day, but then I realized that I had to learn all of these other languages that they don't teach in school. So Honda is a package manager that you can use to install things. I'm doing a lot of documentation now, writing website documentation. So that means that I'm writing things in Markdown, rendering them out as HTML. I have things that are written in JavaScript using JSON files, and then I have configuration files in YAML. And like these are things that I don't think that there are necessary classes in my university that teach people how to do this. So there's this unmet need of like, oh, by the way, we're going to teach you R and Python, but you also need to know all these other little side languages so that you can get to the things that you want to do. The point I want to move into is talking about becoming cloud native. And so Ryan Abernathy is the PI of a project called Pangeo. He had a fantastic talk at the Open Ocean Cloud meeting. Ryan is a oceanographer, and he laid out this idea for the 3 pillars of cloud native computing. And so this first pillar is called data proximate computing. Second pillar is dynamic and elastic scaling. And the last one is working with analysis ready data. And I'm going to cover each of these 3 topics in the next few slides. So these 3 pillars kind of form the foundation for doing cloud native computing. And the concept of data proximate computing has really been with us all along. So on the left there is the first mainframe terminal. So somewhere on this campus, there used to be a computer in a basement, and it was the size of this room. And the technologist used a terminal. It was a keyboard and a monitor and a cable that attached to this machine. And so that's where the term terminal comes from. So in my childhood, my dad as professor brought home our first PC, and I got my first video game. It was fantastic. But there was sort of this shift towards personal computing and running things locally. And it wasn't until the early 2000s when we started to see the rise of the internet and then the rise of cloud computing, where we shifted back toward this aspect of running our analyses not on our local machines, but on these remote services. And so that's what data proximate computing means. So you're just sending your algorithms to another computer to do this analysis. So this map on the right shows the architecture that powers CyVerse, which is a project that I work with. So we're located in Tucson, but we have major resources located in the state of Arizona. We're connected over internet to the Texas Advanced Computing Center, where our data is sort of replicated every night. But these fast connections allow us to reach out to other large major facilities through platforms like the NSF Access, which is their supercomputer network that you can all get signed into and use. And then these orange dots are the Open Science Grid, which is now managed through this PATH partnership to advance throughput computing. But the Open Science Grid is sort of like the old SETI framework. Many thousands of servers, hundreds of thousands of cores. You submit a job to the Open Science Grid, and then your job is randomly assigned onto that network and process. So we have the ability to scale out to find our computing. And so this is another example of data proximate computing as we do it today. For dynamic and elastic scaling, these two screenshots are showing the two dominant cyber GIS platforms that are out there today. So some of you are probably familiar with Google Earth Engine here on the right. So this is just a JavaScript that runs, and it's able to show us some data, plots a long-term time series where it's extracting the NDVI of every pixel for that point for an entire time series for a particular Landsat satellite. So it can do that in a few seconds. And that's partly because the platform is designed in a way that it can rapidly access large volumes of data and then spit out results. The new planetary computer, it's hard to see, but that's running a Jupyter Lab instance. And so planetary computer is built around this Pangeo framework that Ryan Abernathy is helping to lead using the project Jupyter UI in this example, but a lot of Jupyter notebooks are being developed for this, and a few other really handy tools for indexing and searching data. So you can now access the entirety of Earth observation satellite history on either Google's cloud or on Azure. And there's a buy-in for this. They want you to put your credit card down and pay for processing. But the data are there and they're actually freely accessible. So these analysis-ready data are also proliferating in quite a broad sense. Almost every major science domain has got a large archive of analysis-ready data. That could be, for me, working with the National Ecological Observatory Network, or going to NASA's archive, or even back to Earth Engine and pulling data out. So there's genomic data, there's virology data, anything that you can think of. You can probably go and find a public data set which is up on the cloud and it's accessible. And so what that means is that you can go and get access to these data, but streaming them out is not necessarily a trivial thing, particularly when you get up to terabytes and petabytes of data. So what you need is the ability to parallelize these requests. And so some of these API services will allow for that. You can make millions of concurrent requests or millions of data all at once, if you have enough compute on the other end to process. But it also requires having metadata associated with that so that you can find these. So that's the structure. And so the takeaways for why we want to use analysis-ready data, this is just kind of a toy example of how we can take a raster image and then you make these overviews and thumbnails so that you can look at the image at different zoom levels and you can look at it in a map browser. But the real reasons are it's accessible. You can look at it without actually needing to download it. So you don't have to download a multi-gigabyte size file just to see what it is. And then when things are set up in these cloud optimized frameworks, you can actually go in like you have an ice cream scoop or a brownie cutter and just pull out the layers that you want without having to download the entire archive. So 3 pillars, don't forget. And again, there's a link there to Ryan's paper and to his talk. Okay, I'm kind of screaming through this presentation, but the big thing that I think all of you have been hearing about is generative AI, the new ChatGPT and OpenAI platform that's out there. So there's a couple of big players to know about. Microsoft is the one that's investing most in OpenAI. Google has a new Bard. Meta has one called Llama. AWS is somewhere out there. But the investment in AI is shooting up. It's like orders of magnitude more money are going to be going into this in the next few years. Over 10 billion in the last year. They're expecting to go to 200 billion in the next 2 years. This article from NPR, I don't know if you guys caught this in the news, but Google did their demo with Bard and it made a factual error. And the next day their stock dropped by $100 billion, which is like 1/10 of their value. So don't mess up when you put your AI out. Might be the lesson there. So this is using ChatGPT. And so you can go into these platforms like Chat, and you can do a lot of things. You can ask it questions, or you can ask it to design something. So this one, I guess I asked it to, this is my version of Seth's maze experiments. But in 5 seconds, it threw together a design for me. It seemed kind of good. But one of the cool things about these technologies that you can actually follow up with questions. And so the first question that you ask may not necessarily be a very good response, but you can have it narrow up, and it will actually do better on subsequent follow-up questions. Once you get more specific, it can give you better results. So you can ask it questions about contextual or text-based responses. For me, writing a lot of software documentation and training manuals for people, this has been really helpful. I was using it here to help me generate configuration YAML files for deploying Terraform. And I don't know Terraform. I've only used it very trivially, and I'm trying to write a lesson for a workshop. And so this question here was not actually the first question. There's probably 5 or 6 questions before this, but it was able to write an appropriate Terraform configuration file on the first try for me. And more importantly, you can give it code and ask it what the code does or what's wrong with the code. And it can run the code for you and tell you what it thinks is wrong. So these are very valuable potential uses of the platform. I've pulled a couple of preprint articles that I read in the last couple of weeks. I know that Seth actually wrote a pretty good blog post for the campus on this. But just to highlight here, they're suggesting, and obviously this is OpenAI, so they're probably biased, but they're saying something like 80% of the US workforce will be impacted by the use of these AI technologies. And around 20% of the workforce could see half of their tasks. So that's probably us, like data scientists and software engineers. So we're going to be using these tools whether we want to or not, whether they're going to be impacting us in ways that we don't necessarily. 2 more articles. One of these is about ChatGPT, and the other one is about Google Copilot. But more early results, again, not peer-reviewed. So the results of using ChatGPT, they're using standard deviations. So a 0.8 standard deviation is about a 50% increase in output. So using ChatGPT for productivity, 50% increase. Similar paper from the folks at Microsoft and GitHub using the Copilot AI, they're seeing a 55.8% increase in productivity. So this is a disruptive technology in the sense that you could get 50% more productivity out of your people if they know how to use these technologies. And they're assistants, they're digital assistants. So this is like, whoa, this could be an important change in the way that we approach our daily work. And I know that universities are dealing with this from student education perspective, students turning in ChatGPT homework assignments. But this is probably, I don't know, in my lifetime, I can't think of another technology that has got the level of hype that this is bringing right now. And we can all appreciate this is part of the hype cycle that it will probably drop at some point. But this could be very big. Okay, so the closeout on this, there's a couple to keep your eye on. So OpenAI is the one that's got billions of dollars poured into it. Our little happy hugging face. The Hugging Face company is setting themselves up as the GitHub of AI models. So they host trained AI models. You can go to their website and you can access typically just little web-based interfaces that link to their models running on free VMs. So you can use a Hugging Face model to do DALL-E or Midjourney type image generation. The important thing is that you can download that model and you can run it locally on your own GPU servers. So you can get these models, pre-trained models for free. That's sort of part of the purpose of Hugging Face. The GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, and then LLM is this large language model. So those are the ones that you want to keep your eye on. And I think we've all heard of ChatGPT, OpenAI, and Bard. Metashape's Llama is coming along, and the Llama part just comes from the extra L's. And so, yeah, these are going to be, well, they are available. You're able to run them on their services locally, but take them and use them for what you want. You can be designed in many different ways. My suggestion is you start out with these well-defined prompts. So you want to have a good idea about what you're asking it when you first ask it, and then be ready to follow it up. And it, in general, will give you pretty decent results. If you're struggling with writing code or you've forgotten how to write code, ask it to write the code. And again, that's your time savings. And if you have code that doesn't work, ask it what's wrong with it, and it can give you an answer. So, okay. So I'm going to talk about CyVerse now. So CyVerse is the project that I work with. It's a National Science Foundation funded cyber infrastructure project. It's been around for about 15 years at this point. We've got over 100,000 registered users. There's been over 1,500 publications, peer-reviewed publications that use CyVerse to do their science. The data store, this number is a little deceptive. We have about 12 petabytes in our data store, but it's actually 2 6-petabyte data stores. One's in Texas, one's in Arizona. And we've had about 40,000 undergraduates and graduates go through our training program. I've been with the project officially for like 6 years. I met the folks from the project about 9 years ago. And so the public CyVerse is there for educators and researchers. It was initially established as the iPlant Collaborative for plant genomics research, but after 5 years, it was expanded to help all the life sciences. In the last 5 years, so in years 11 through 15, we've been diversifying. We work with astronomers, earth scientists, basically anyone that has cyber infrastructure problems. The public CyVerse is what we manage for ourselves. We have deployments of the platform, which is essentially a cyber infrastructure middleware set up on commercial cloud for private companies. We have a CyVerse Health Enclave that we run on Health Cloud, and then some 3-letter agencies have been using the platform as well. We've got cloud for themselves. So the general kind of workflow is that you as a researcher, as an educator, you're at your laptop, connect to the internet, and you can kind of come at it from 2 different ways. You can use our data science workbench, which we call the discovery environment. This is a browser-based interface that you can use to start virtual machines or to manage your data. The other option is that you can use our what we call Cacao, so this cloud automation and continuous analysis orchestration platform, which you can use to manage your own commercial or public cloud deployments. And these are backed by the data store. So this is this 6-petabyte archive that we've got. And it itself can connect to other cloud resources, but all the data that are in CyVerse are accessible when you start an analysis in the workbench. You can connect that back up to Cacao. And then we have an event-based service called Data Watch, where if you want to create a folder in our directory, you can set up a rule, drop files in the folder, will trigger a workflow. And then that workflow can run in other places than just inside of our infrastructure. But the infrastructure can be run on NSF public cloud, it can be run on the commercial cloud, and it's all managed through Kubernetes. So one of our close collaborations right now is with the NSF Jetstream project. So this is the second funding cycle for Jetstream. So Jetstream 1 was a cloud that was centered in Indiana in the Texas Advanced Computing Center. It's now mostly there in Indiana. So the largest cloud is there in Indiana. There are regional clouds spread out around the country. But CyVerse is building this Cacao interface as one of the featured interfaces for Jetstream. And it's a tool that you can use to manage your virtual machines. So the way that you approach using Cacao, let's assume that you are a researcher or a teacher and you want to do a workshop. You know that you're going to use Project Jupyter and you have some Python environments that you're going to use. You can select a base operating system like Ubuntu, and then you bring this to Cacao and then select the number of instances you want, amount of RAM you need. Cacao will provision the Jupyter Hub for you across many servers, and in about 10 minutes it's running, and then your students can all connect through that single URL. That's just like one example of using it. You could also use this for running large analysis pipelines. The first use case for using CyVerse that I want to talk about, this is Emmanuel Gonzalez. He's a PhD student in the College of Agriculture. And he's a first-gen student from the Imperial Valley in California. His family are farmers. And he's interested in growing a better tomorrow for us. And so this is a paper that he recently put together where they're working with large data sets for phenomics. And these are all his slides. I'm using his permission, but the idea here is that there's lots of ways to collect data. Got these large robot gantries, high performance carts or tractors, sensors, drones, using our phones. So we can get data. Tucson, or not Tucson, I guess, Maricopa, Arizona is home to the U of A's gantry. So this is a 200-meter long robot. It's on rails. You go up and down a field in a few hours. And inside of that sensor box, there's at least 4 different types of sensor, but the primary ones that Manuel was using are LiDAR, visible imagery, photosystem 2 fluorescence, so looking at photosynthesis, and then an IR thermal camera. So you can see that each of these data sets produces a significant amount of data when they collect it. And one of the phenotypes that he's interested in is the structure of lettuce. So you can see they've got 5 different varieties, which have just in the LiDAR scan very different phenotypic variation in their appearance. So the problem was chat. There we go. Stop. Okay. So 3D scans, RGB and thermal, 20,000 plants. Multiplied by the scans and the different phenotypes, so they're up around 6.5 million images for this one study, which is sort of a lot of data. And so they're taking these images as input, they're processing them through object detection or clustering or thresholding or image segmentation to get at these phenotypes that they're interested in. And this is the general data pipeline for how they do this. So the gantry is generating 1 to 10 terabytes of data. That's going to a local cache server every night. It goes on the cache server, it gets compressed so that they can then send it down the road to Tucson to the CyVerse data store. So it lands up in the data store. They're able to then see it where they've got their RStudio interfaces running and the Jupyter interfaces running. They're looking at the testing and the prototyping of things. They can then trigger workflows on our high performance computing center using an open source workflow manager called Makeflow. So Makeflow is taking these millions of images and it's processing them. It's then dumping the data back into the data store. This is all leveraging a technology called iRods, which is this integrated rule-oriented data system. And this is how the CyVerse data store tracks all this data. And then once that's done, it's available. So their collaborators can access it right away. And importantly, their collaborators can also come back to the discovery environment and look at these analyses and rerun these analyses. This all happens in under 24 hours. So every day that this thing scans, let's see if this loads. I have a giant GIF image here. So it probably won't happen to this, but this was a video of a Slack. So every night they get a Slack message, which is the full field orthomosaic, and they're able to zoom in on it and then check the data set so they can make sure that it processed properly, that images were clear, things are looking okay, nothing fell over or exploded in the field. Kind of disappointed. Can I get a shot? It was a giant file. Okay, we'll give it a moment. Catch me later and I'll show it to you in real Slack. Okay, so the Fido Oracle paper came out a few weeks ago. It's in Frontiers Plant Sciences. Again, the slides are online. You guys are welcome to go click on the links and check it out. So the Fido Oracle pipeline is all open source. All the scripts are there if you guys want to go and reuse them for your own purposes. Okay, a second use case. So Alex Butch, formerly of University of Georgia, now University of Arizona, has been a long time CyVerse user. about 7 or 8 years ago, he designed this web portal called DIRT, so digital imaging of root traits. And so DIRT leverages multiple pieces of the CyVerse infrastructure. And the new DIRT platform, or DIRT 3D, essentially what it's doing is he's going out and taking the root traits from these maize plants, taking 3D scans of the root ball. They've got the images in the 3D model, and then they're able to do individual root tracking, build the root architecture, and then look at specific traits. And this is led by Sushing Liu, who's his postdoc. Again, let me see if this works. This was a YouTube video. So this is just a LiDAR scan of one of the root balls. So you imagine you've got each root creating about a gigabyte size file. Each experiment's got over 1,000 roots, so you're up to about a terabyte of data just for your roots. So this is the actual data set that they're working with, but the way that they're leveraging CyVerse is that they've designed this portal called Plant IT, and so this is all open source. But you can come in here and create a project. The data sets will actually show all the data that are in CyVerse. These are the individual workflows which they've set up. Many of these are running through, they're all leveraging GitHub repositories, but these are triggered events that then run in the CyVerse infrastructure. They run the results back to the data store, and then you can analyze the data further. So again, this is available. Create a CyVerse account, log into this thing, go to their GitHub page, fork it, change out the logos, give them a reference, and it's yours. Okay, and just to close that, Alex does have open positions and he's looking to hire postdocs. So if you know any postdocs interested in root phenotyping, there's a position available. Okay, so this third use case is closer to my heart. This is a NSF project that I'm working on as a PI. So this open forest observatory is centered around using drones to collect forest inventory plot data. And so CoPI, Mike Kuntz here with some Indigenous students showing them how it's done. The main project lead, Derek Young, is at UC Davis. And then Jeff Gillen, my data scientist, there with me here today. So very similar to the other projects, we go out and collect data. We get lots of imagery. We then put it into the CyVerse data store. And then we're running our analysis on Jetstream 2, which is this NSF cloud. And I'll talk a little bit in a few minutes about these file formats, but these are cloud optimized formats that we're converting our data to. And that's just a point cloud of the forest plot. So for our specific workflow, they're running a proprietary software that has a floating license, this photogrammetry tool called Metashade, and they're able to run it across many nodes at the same time using Jetstream VMs. They're then taking this and running it through some ML object detection. So they're interested in getting species level information and then essentially phenotyping the health of forest trees and woods. And these are linked to US Forest Service inventory analysis techniques. So the idea here is that we can fly drones to do forest health. The takeaway from this are that along this processing pipeline, we're turning things into these cloud optimized file types, which may be of interest to some of you. So on the vector side, you have things like GeoJSONs. So these are sort of like replacements for the conventional shape file. A GeoJSON can be a point, a line, polygon, multi-polygon. And so that can kind of establish your boundaries on an object. The cloud optimized point cloud, I might have time to show in a little bit, but these are these octet style point clouds, so you can then extract pieces of information out. On the raster side, we have cloud optimized geotiffs. So these are normal geotiffs, rasters that have an octet on them so you can extract data. And then this last file format is called ZAR. This is part of the Pangeo project. They're doing this for a lot of this long-term global climate monitoring. But the ZAR format it stands for zipped array. So you can use the X-array software to read a ZAR file. Essentially, the first layer is longitude, second layer is latitude, and then you have this n-dimensional array of values, and that could be things like rainfall, precipitation patterns, or temperature. And so that data cube has this indexing on it, so you can just extract a single pixel from an entire time series like instantaneously. And it can be many gigabytes in size, and you don't have to download this. So we're focused on this for the Open Forest Observatory, all our data sets. Okay, so concluding here, the big data landscape really is that big. We're on this ticking timeline for getting our data to be accessible at the end of year 25. So how are you guys going to prepare yourselves to put your data out there? Working on the cloud, we're already doing it, whether or not we realize it, and it's going to become more of a place where you need to think about doing research. And then AI is already kind of changing our lives. And the CyVerse use cases were just kind of. So CyVerse is fully funded by the National Science Foundation. I appreciate you guys getting me out here. I also appreciate NSF for keeping this thing going, and thanks for your time.